Hello YouTube. Welcome to a new series where I am going to be running through games in a Let's Play format and analyzing them as a designer to see what I can learn from them. I'm going to be talking primarily about game design, but I'll talk about other subjects as well, fun anecdotes, whatever I think of to talk about. I'll be focusing a lot on picking apart how the small decisions in a game affect the overall experience. So if you're not interested in the little details, this probably isn't the series for you. So we're starting off with The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. This was actually originally going to be Majora's Mask. However, when I was considering how I was going to talk about Majora's Mask, I realized I'd need to talk about how it plays off of what Ocarina of Time established. And when I went looking for a good reference for that, I couldn't really find anything that fit what I wanted. So I decided why not make it myself and practice the format as I was doing it. So I'll be playing through at least all of the child dungeons and gain the Master Sword, because I want to talk about the transition from child to adult, but I don't know if I'll be playing much after that. So without further ado, let's analyze The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. So this game was published by Nintendo for the Nintendo 64 in 1998. This is about 2 years into the Nintendo 64's life cycle, despite the fact that it was developed alongside Mario 64, which was a release title. Because of how esteemed this game is, there are a lot of faults in it which aren't talked about. And I'm not here to pick out faults so much as just talk about the design of the game, what it does, and how that affects the play experience for good or ill. Now, you may have noticed already that the graphics do not look that great. This is in part because the graphics don't look that great, and in part because of my recording setup, which is currently also not that great for recording from an N64. So just bear that in mind. We're naming ourselves Link because that's why I always named myself as a kid. And go. Welcome to the opening cutscene. So I am not going to be skipping through any text when I can avoid it here, because I want to show this experience for anybody who hasn't actually played it themselves. That said, I can't actually skip this, I believe. Now, there is something about this coming up portion of the cutscene that I don't really like, which is this right here. So this is a scene we'll see several times during the game before it actually happens, and I don't really like that they're spoiling it this early in, but at the same time, I suspect that people who had trouble with the game at first may have been kept interested by the idea that this scene might appear in the game later on, so I can see why they did it. I just don't particularly like the effect it has on how the narrative flows. Alright, so now we are actually hitting A to advance the text. Let me talk about text speed real quick. So the way the text works in this game, and a lot of N64 games, a lot of games from this era, in fact, on consoles, is the text scrolls along displaying one character at a time until it finishes, and usually it doesn't let you advance the text until it's displayed everything. Now, in Japanese, this probably wasn't much of an issue, but when it comes to English, we generally have far more characters in each word. And because of that, this can make the text very slow, and it can hurt the pacing and all of that stuff. I don't think it's a huge issue in this game, but in some Okami, it can definitely hurt the experience. Also, on another note, I have heard, although I can't confirm, that rather than just being a bunch of cheap vows and such, the speech of the Great Deku Tree in Japanese was actually an archaic form of Japanese. So it probably sounded a lot more authentic as being ancient than this does, where it's mostly just normal speech. That said, as a kid, I couldn't tell the difference, to be perfectly honest. Oh, also, fun little note. This story tends to follow the general outline of the hero's journey. It's a narrative thing. Look it up on TV tropes if you're interested. Navi is the herald, by the way. So this cutscene right here actually is more than just being a cutscene. It actually serves a purpose as a nice establishing shot for Kokiri Forest, and it very importantly gives us the direction of the Great Deku Tree relative to our starting location, which is going to be very useful in a second. Also, it provides pretty much the only real characterization Navi gets in the game. Yes. And I'll talk about Navi a bit later. I do not find Navi nearly as annoying as most people do, but she still isn't well executed. So, on another note, all of the cutscenes in this game, none of them are pre-rendered or anything like that. This is all done in real time in the engine. And that's going to be an important note, again, for later on. I feel like they put this scene in part to get kids to relate to the character more, but it also fits in with the refusal of the call bit of the hero's journey, so who knows? See, I would speed the text up, but unfortunately the function they have to do that would just skip through all the text, which is not that great. Alright, so now we have control of our character and we have our HUD, we're playing the game. So, if this room looks a little weird to you, that's because this is not actually 3D graphics except for Link. This is actually a room that's been modeled and textured in 3D, and then they've rendered it, and they've just taken that render and overlaid it on a few collision boxes. I'll talk about that more when we get to the market section of the game. So I think they were very aware that this could very well be your first 3D game, because even though it's 2 years into the console's life cycle, this is the kind of game that moves consoles. And keeping in mind, we had not had a Zelda game for 6 years at this point. So this was a big deal. Probably a lot of people bought the console for this. So I like how they put this table right in the middle here to force you to walk around it, just to get you used to some basic movement. So we're going to exit here. And now after Saria comes to greet us, now, I actually really like this setup for teaching you about your player movement and how it is relative to the camera position and not to the direction that Link is facing, because if you're new to 3D games, you don't know this convention yet. So if I press straight down, I'm going to go up the ladder. But if you're new to 3D games, notice this camera angle here. So if I were to go straight up, I would get stuck in this corner and have to run around, and there is a good chance I would go back inside the house, which now is looking at me from a different camera angle. With these pre-rendered graphical indoor areas, the camera can pan, but it won't ever move or zoom. So now that I've re-entered this area by accident, if I keep trying to move Link relative to Link, I'm likely to end up running around, and this panning camera actually acts as a really good tutorial for the fact that movement is relative to the camera if you hadn't figured it out already. And then if I run back out, and now actually in this position, if I just press straight down too, that will also get me stuck. And pressing straight down or straight up is a lot more likely on this than on a newer controller, because there's far fewer axes of movement, and it's designed to lock in place in an 8-degree axis. So climb down the ladder. And look, we've just had our ladder tutorial. Congratulations. So, yes, Navi. I'm actually curious what Navi has to say here. Okay, yes, it's just a reminder about the Deku Tree. So, they put us right next to Saria and the sign. They don't actually tell us how to talk to them, but the interface does. So it's very likely we'll end up doing it. I don't believe you actually have to talk to Saria, but most people will want to after that cutscene. At least on their first playthrough. Also, notice how they keep repeating Great Deku Tree to make sure you know that's where you're going. It's a bit more than they probably need to, but they're doing it. And I believe this sign just says Link's house. Yes, it just says Link's house. Also, this tree is going to get recycled later for Majora's Mask, as are many other things in this game. So I like how they do the pathing here to the Deku Tree. So they've already established the general direction of the tree, so you know it's over here if you're paying attention. Additionally, you can actually see the tree in the distance, and there is an actual physical path that is leading you in one of two directions. And there's a fence stopping you from just going straight forward without climbing over it. Alright, so we've established that this is the direction we're supposed to go. We might end up going the other direction. I believe there's a few NPCs who will mention that you should go to the Deku Tree, but it's pretty probable we'll go in this direction. So if we run over here, oh god, water. Will I drown in water? First, there's a sign, also directing us to the Great Deku Tree. But this is our tutorial for both water and jumping. So it's very likely you'll make this first jump even if you don't know how jumping works in the game. But there's a good chance as you're doing these jumps that you will accidentally fall in, and then you'll learn that you can swim. It's a great time. So, Mito. I wanted to talk about his role in the story, but honestly, I don't have much to say about this guy other than he acts as a gate for us twice, which does help build resentment of him, there's that, but that's pretty much all I've got to say. So this is going to be a very common theme throughout the entirety of this game, is a lot of the game is basically just gates where you need to have or use a certain item or progression element just to get to the next bit of game. And it's a bit obnoxious and can cause some problems, but it's not terrible. That said, for both this game and Majora's Mask, I eventually ended up printing out guides from game FAQs because of the number of places I got stuck, and putting them in a binder so I could quickly reference them while playing. So our first time approaching the shop, which is a necessary place to approach even though it won't necessarily tell you that, this girl up on the awning over here will call us and basically explain the Z targeting system. So the fairy you have in this game, Navi, is basically, she's not just there for hints, she's also there as an explanation of the Z targeting system. So this is the tutorial area, by the way. This entire Kokiri Forest is the tutorial area. They have front-loaded all of this in this one area, for the most part. Obviously, when you get new items and such, that will be taught later, but basically, Kokiri Forest and the Great Deku Tree Dungeon are your tutorial. And this is important to note because it's pretty good in some ways and very not good in others. Now, front-loading your tutorial is generally not a great idea, but they can get away with it here to a certain extent. For one, this is back when games were sold with manuals. So, if you bought this game legally, you would have the game manual, which I will link a PDF of below. And you'd be able to read through it and see all the controls. Additionally, Link's house is your spawn point whenever you reload the game after turning off the system, unless you are in a dungeon. So that gives you an easy opportunity to run back to any of the tutorial segments here and learn things again. So this is more jumping tutorial in case you didn't get the first time and just ended up swimming. And so, fun little note, sometimes this controller doesn't give a full input and is very, very annoying when I'm trying to jump things. But one thing they did pretty well here in this tutorial was rewarding you for doing things that you're going to want to do throughout the game. So jump across the stones, you get some rupees, which you'll need. Run through the grass, get some rupees, so on and so forth. I'll show off a few more of those later. So inside the shop, if we talk to this guy, if we do the talk to the owner option, he'll specifically tell you that they sell shields, so now you know you can get the shield here. And it's very likely you're going in this because it's one of the closest buildings to the tree, and it's one of the most prominent buildings. So if we scroll over to the shield, we see it costs 40 rupees. By the way, notice how the camera is panning but not moving. So we need to earn 40 rupees basically by running around in the tutorial area. Also, there's one hidden back here. So the tutorial is both here to... I will talk to that person later when I'm trying to make another point. The tutorial is here both to... It's not just here to teach you how to play the game, it's to teach you what to expect and how to think about the game. And I think, if not for one fairly big fault, they did a very good job of that here. Also, this area is very open, which is conducive to learning how to navigate a 3D space if you haven't before, and it has some vertical elements without going crazy with them. So if we talk to this guy, he'll tell us about cutting grass, which he doesn't do very well because we can grab the grass, but that doesn't actually do anything. We need a sword to cut it. Whose house is this? Alright, this is Saria's. So if we explore the interiors, we get various goodies. Aw, hearts. Because Saria. And we also have a few NPCs with some tutorial text in these. but it's mostly goodies. We're very likely to learn about picking up and throwing pots just by running in here, but there's also a tutorial for doing the same thing with rocks earlier. So you might notice as you're running around that there's stuff up there, and again, the game will reward you for exploration, because exploration is one of the core aesthetics that the game is trying to deliver upon. So this serves both as another exploration reward and as a semi-tutorial for navigating some of the tighter spaces in the game. And then, once you get up to this girl, she also tells you how to look around in first person from the best point in the area to do that from, to get an overview of the whole area. Now, it might have been nice to actually be able to climb up here and then follow the bridges to get a rupee somewhere else, just so that it's easy to get this overview of the area. Okay, so we'll notice lots of things, including this over here, which is likely to draw the eye, and I will talk about that bit later, because that is the glaring flaw that I mentioned earlier in this tutorial. So if we run through the grass, we're likely to get more rupees, and the way the grass is scattered around, it's pretty likely we'll run into them, especially if we're not used to navigating in 3D. We talk to this guy, he'll tell us how to pick up rocks and throw them, which will also reward us with rupees. We run into Mito's house, we will likely learn about chess. I do very much like how they use the interface to tell you how to do things. I think they put the animation on the A button there so that it draws the eye, so that you'll notice that it's actually telling you what you can do contextually. Alright, so if we try to leave, this guy here is going to stop us and basically tell us that any Kokiri who leave the forest die. I meant to check that sign. Oops. Check. There we go. Yep. And that's just reiterating the point for us. So, if I go up here, now we have the train area. Actually, first let me go into the house of the Know-It-All brothers, who don't really know it all, they just know about the HUD and menus. Actually, I won't really bore you guys with this. Basically, they just tell us how to use this menu and scroll through it, how to save the game, I believe, how to use the C buttons to use our items, so on and so forth. Interestingly, these two guys, when you speak to them, they have a couple options, including I don't want to hear about it. This guy here has the longest text, and you can't choose not to hear about stuff from him, which I do find odd. Grab, throw. That's a glitch I've not seen before. Okay then. Anyway. Also, by the way, most of these fixed camera pre-rendered interiors have 2 camera angles you can cycle with up C. Alright, so the training area, which an NPC down here will actually tell us to go to. By the way, those NPCs fading in, I don't believe that's for rendering purposes. That's just because they want them to feel more like forest spirits. Now, I like that little instruction there. It's nice and fun. But here's where I'm going to talk about the issue that this tutorial has. So if I read this sign, it's talking about how to attack with my sword. If I read this sign, it's talking about how to attack with my sword. And most players are going to assume that they're expected to have the sword when they're reading these signs, and they may even leave right on the spot. Now, if they don't, here's a few tutorials that don't require the sword, which I'll do after I get it, and then this bit. So I've seen people at this point press on but stop reading the signs because they assumed they were all about using the sword and then miss how to actually enter this hole because it can be a little finicky. Like so. But then there's another point up here in which they're likely to disengage with this boulder. So I've been using I've been using Z to change my camera angle, but technically we haven't been taught that yet. But if we just run straight forward after coming out of that hole, we'll run into this sign which tells us about how to move our view around with Z targeting when we don't have a target. Now, I like that they put this here because it's a place where it's actually useful with these nice narrow square corridors. However, I have a problem here. So I think this boulder was placed here in order to help set more expectations for the player of you're gonna need to explore stuff, you're gonna need to take risks and face the unknown. However, if that boulder causes you to run away, which is a possibility, now if you were just stuck in Kokiri Forest, it would be reasonable that you would eventually come back, brave the boulder, and get the sword in a reasonable amount of time. But there's a problem with that, which is there's one other area you can go to and waste a ton of time getting nothing done. Because you can't do anything in that area if you don't have the sword, the shield, or anything else. So, also, this sign, by the way, I guess this is here in case you missed the text on how to equip the sword. It might have been better to actually put a text about the store in case you hadn't found the store yet. But, oh well. So, I'm going to equip my sword real quick. Yay. I have a sword. I'm not going to save. By the way, rolling is faster than walking. Alright, so we're in the train zone again. Now, this guide teaches us about the various moves we can do while Z targeting. The side jump, forwards roll, also the jump attack, and the backflip. And we get rewarded for doing those techniques. And this one teaches us how we can switch between two targets while Z targeting. Now we get back to this one, which tells us that we can cut grass with our sword, which we can then go back and cut that other grass if we want. Unfortunately, the guy doesn't reward us for doing him that favor directly, which I feel is a missed opportunity to train people for the side quests later. Also, the attacks you do with your sword, you have combos, and which attack you do, as we'll learn from the next sign, is dependent on both whether or not you're Z targeting and whether you're moving your stick in a direction when you're slashing. So then this one will teach us about the basics of how doing different combinations of targeting and stick will get different attacks, and if we do as it asks, we get money. Good job of rewarding the player with something that they immediately know is valuable because they can use it to buy the other progression item we need. Now, of course, the problem here is they put the sword stuff at the beginning and established the expectation that you were expected to have the sword upon coming here, which isn't the case. If I were designing this, I would have designed it in a looping fashion, where after getting the sword, you come to this bit of the tutorial that tells you about sword stuff. Alright, so now that we have the sword, and we have enough money to get the shield, let's go and grab that, and I'll show you the other bit of misdirection. So we've already seen the misdirection of this may not be where you want to get the sword, oh, the boulder is scary. But there's another bit here as well, which is this character's dialogue. This right here, it sells things you can get in the forest for free. And that is true of every item this shop sells, except for the shield. So this character has basically indirectly told us, and her next dialogue even mentions the shield, that we can get the shield for free in the forest. Which is not the case. Also, she tells us more about how to equip items. So I'm gonna buy the shield here. And the thing about you can get this stuff in the forest for free is that while this area is called Kokiri Forest, it doesn't really feel like a forest. It feels like a village inside the middle of a clearing in a forest. So I thought for a little while that this place was actually called Kokiri Village because I forgot what the text had told me. One sec, equip the shield. I always scroll the wrong direction. Whatever, save the game. Doesn't really matter. So, we've been misdirected in two places that where we can actually get the item may not be the place we want to get the item. Additionally, we can see if we were looking around up on that pillar up there that there's something interesting up there. Now, technically, the game hasn't taught us about climbing yet, but it is a very, very easy thing to figure out, and it's not a good enough way to gate an area off. Because while the direction to more progression is gated off, the Lost Woods is not. And the Lost Woods, unfortunately, if you run into it in this stage, very much lives up to its name. It's a place where you get lost in and get nothing done. So, if I go in here, now this area feels a lot more like a forest than Kokiri Forest does. And I only realized that Kokiri Forest was the forest being mentioned after accidentally running into one of these things, because this is how the Lost Woods works. It's certain doorways basically lead back to Kokiri Forest. I did not realize that the Lost Woods was not the forest being referred to until I saw that title pop up a couple times and stopped ignoring it, because it fades out pretty quickly. So basically the way this works, and I think they also might have assumed that you wouldn't figure this out initially, is that if it's got this light in it, it will bring you back. If it is dark, then you can run through it. And this area is somewhat extensive, and it's because of both the way it's laid out and these doors, it's very easy to feel like you are missing parts of the Lost Woods, which could very well be the case. So, when I first played this game, and I have seen other people who were adults at the time playing the game for the first time and make this mistake as well, I spent at least an hour wandering around the Lost Woods trying to find my sword and shield. And the problem with that is not only is it a huge waste of time and frustrating, it also creates this huge negative possibility space in the Lost Woods, because there are things to do in there, but you don't, at that point, have any of the equipment you need to actually do anything there. And I suspect, although I can't confirm, that at one point in the game, the Lost Woods was actually situated in between Kokiri Forest and the outside world, and that this entrance that this guy is guarding here was the one that went to the Lost Woods. Because that actually does go to the Lost Woods, but it goes to a bridge which leads right back out. Hey everyone, thank you for watching the first video in this series. Join me next week when I'll be delving into the Great Deku Tree Dungeon and exploring the puzzle design, atmosphere, and enemy progression therein. If you have any comments, critique, or questions, please leave them in the comments, and if I find them especially interesting, they may end up in a new video.